Conservative Party Leader Pierre Poilievre won big amongst Conservative delegates this weekend. He secured 87.4% of the vote in his leadership review. But polls suggest Canadians still have a negative impression of the Conservative leader, with the Angus Reid Institute polling suggesting a net favourability for Pierre Poilievre at -22, while Abacus data polling has it a little bit better at -6. Meanwhile, Mark Carney has seen an uptick in both of those poll sets, both reporting positive nets at +26 and +23. So despite the big disparity amongst impressions of the leaders, the parties are staying relatively close in the polls. Angus Reid Institute has the Liberals at a 3 percentage point lead ahead of the Conservatives, with Abacus putting the Liberals 4 percentage points ahead. Now, Leger is suggesting it's a 9-point lead for the Liberals, and Liaison coming in at an 8-point difference. All right, we've got two of the pollsters referenced there. Here with me now, David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data, and Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. It's good to see you both. David, I wasn't super surprised by the number Pierre Poilievre got in Calgary. I actually thought he was going to get 90% because of the way the party supports him. Where can he grow it from there, though, with the broader Canadian public? Because he doesn't want to just be the Conservative opposition leader, right? He wants to be the Prime Minister. That's the plan.
He does, and that's very clear. I think, there's one group, about 14% of Canadians, who say they are open to voting Conservative, but right now are either undecided or supporting another party when you ask them how they would vote. And that is basically the group that he's got to start thinking about. Now, the good news is among that group, there is a chunk who right now say they have a favorable view of Mr. Poilievre. They agree on some of the priorities that the Conservatives have put in the window. But the biggest challenge facing Mr. Poilievre with that group is, one, not all of them feel that way. Many of them find him a little off-putting, maybe a little immature, maybe a little too aggressive. But all of them, almost all of them, like Mark Carney. They trust Mark Carney. And right now, the vast majority of them would vote Liberal. And so the biggest challenge facing Mr. Poilievre is not just how do you make himself more potentially appealing, but how do you do it in comparison to Mark Carney right now, who continues to become more popular?
So Shachi, your data on the positives for the Prime Minister, you're roughly in line with each other, right? Margin of error type stuff. A big gap, though, on where David has the net negatives for Mr. Poilievre and where you have the net negatives for Mr. Poilievre in your data. How does he overcome something like that? Because we did see a more positive, personal, reflective kind of tone on Friday night. We'll see if that sustains itself. What is the path to improve that for him?
Yeah, well, first of all, one of the biggest challenges of doing a speech like that and showing a warmer, softer, more positive side on a Friday night is it's a Friday night. And it's a Friday night with no football. I mean, who was watching? So that's one of my questions. And I don't mean that flippantly, but it's one of those things where he needs to be able to demonstrate that, not just in Calgary in front of a room of party faithful who's going to cheer at everything and anything he says, is over time. And the challenge there, the real struggle there is that Mr. Poilievre is, to an extent, between a rock and a hard place in terms of his ability to grow his vote. Because the people who showed up in Calgary to give him that 87.5%, and of course, it's my mom's birthday. I think about Tiger parents. They're all going, where was the other 12.5%, folks? But notwithstanding that, he's got to keep that wing of the party that fervently supports him, that will show up for him, that will ride or die for him, on side, while at the same time saying and doing the things that will convince those non-conservative voters to come on over. And I just heard, a very good and convincing and cogent series of arguments from Melissa Lantsman in that last interview that you just did with her, saying a lot of the right things. But it's one thing for someone like Melissa Lantsman, who's one of the better communicators, one of the best communicators in that caucus. Another thing for Mr. Poilievre to show up and come on a show with you and say, yes, I'm going to vote. I'm going to meet with the Prime Minister. I am going to vote with some of his legislation because that's not just what my base wants, but what the whole country wants. The thing is, when he starts to say stuff like that, he runs the risk of alienating his own base. It's the same thing on what a lot of Canadians are expecting out of their leaders right now on the cross-border file, on the Trump file. The challenge for Mr. Poilievre is that a third of his own base gives Donald Trump a very good or good review in terms of the last year of Trump's presidency. There are about 1 in 5 conservative voters who say, you know, if Canada became part of the United States, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Think about how that plays with Liberal voters, NDP voters, Bloc voters, Green voters. So these are two bases on two completely different planets. And Mr. Poilievre has to walk a tightrope. He has to find himself saying the things that appeal to non-conservative voters without alienating the conservative base that basically put him where he is and is keeping him where he is.
Yeah, and look, and David, you know, the Friday night television audience for us was hundreds of thousands of people. So, like, that's a conservative convention on the CBC. Think about that. It was the biggest audience there for them. So people saw it, and then the coverage. But like it does get a level of penetration. I take your point, Shachi. It's got to be sustained. So, David, the factors that Shachi outlined there, you know, Mr. Poilievre's reputation as a disruptor, that was his promise. The biggest disruptor in the world is the most powerful man in the world. That is a challenge right now, right? So how does he thread this needle and calibrate the response that Shachi outlined there to win over those accessible voters, or is it impossible at this current moment?
Look, I'm not sure it is. I mean, tomorrow, a formal or successful conservative leader is going to see his prime ministerial portrait unveiled. Stephen Harper had that challenge as well. I think every conservative leader has the challenge of at once speaking to the base, making sure the base is united, is motivated, while at the same time finding a way to grow. And look, I look at the data and I'm not convinced there's a place that the Conservatives can get much more than 41%. I think that not just because Mark Carney remains quite popular, but because that's not the structures we understand in Canada. I think, you know, Stephen Harper was, up till Mr. Poilievre, the most successful Conservative leader since Brian Mulroney's post-merger of the two parties. And yet he's also faced a ceiling that he could not break through, even at a moment when we had a financial crisis, when you had the rise of the New Democrats that spooked some Liberals. It wasn't enough. And so fundamentally, I think, you know, Mr. Poilievre faces a structural problem that unless the New Democrats find a way to chip away some points from the Liberals, the Bloc sustains some strength in Quebec, it's going to be really difficult. And I'm not sure there's a clear path to do it because, again, as Shachi points out, how do you speak to the base while at the same time speaking to an audience that is so different, fundamentally different in terms of what they're looking for and their outlook on the world, in fact.
Right, and when you look at the leader numbers, Shachi, on this point, like Stephen Harper won a majority government, he won 3 elections, but Mark Carney is not Michael Ignatieff or Stéphane Dion, right? So that is a very different dynamic. And we don't know who will emerge from the NDP leadership. I'm not sure it's a Jack Layton figure right now, though. So Shachi, on that, the binary nature of our politics as we talk right now, this is one of the big obstacles that Conservatives have. Do you see do you see that changing in the data in any way with the NDP about 2 months away from picking their next leader?
I mean, talk to us in 2 months, David. But I to your point and to David's point, Stephen Harper did as well as he did at a time when the left of center was fractured, when it was in disarray, when it was in chaos and suffering from weak leadership. And then it was the third party that came along with the strong leader in Jack Layton. So, you know, that is not the same scenario that we're looking at right now. Today, you're seeing Mark Carney at an approval level, according to our numbers, of 60%. David's net positive numbers are fairly similar to ours. And what is notable about Mark Carney's approval numbers, and important to point out, approval numbers and vote numbers are different. Right now, Mark Carney is running ahead of his party. Right now, Pierre Poilievre is running well behind his party's vote intent. But Carney's approval numbers are, number one, notable because he's holding his own in every single region of the country, including in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where he is competitive in terms of approval or favorability versus Pierre Poilievre, and also demographically. There was a point, per our data, where you saw a massive gender divide and a massive age demographic divide between Poilievre and then leader Justin Trudeau. Carney has filled the gap on that front. He is now holding his own among women and men across all age demographics. Not saying that he's leading in every situation, but he's not trailing by a significant, insurmountable amount. So I would say that in and of itself, and numbers go up, numbers go down, approval goes up, approval goes down, but he's riding a wave in this moment that makes it difficult for Pierre Poilievre to punch through. And he said, by the way, a lot of the right and good things Mr. Poilievre did on Friday night. He talked about affordability. He talked about cost of living. He talked about Canadians wanting to have lives where they could see their own standard of living improve. Really important issue. In fact, the number one issue for most Canadians in terms of what they identify, what they care about the most. At the same time, when the main protagonist of Canadian politics continues to be the U.S. president, it is hard to punch through that. We talked about this on Thursday. We're going to keep talking about this, David, in terms of can Poilievre run the clock on people finally pivoting to a point where they say, I care less about what the man in Washington is talking about and more about what the man in Ottawa is talking about. But let's see, because we have no idea what's around the corner.
Right, and there was not a lot of talk about the U.S. in a detailed way in the speech on Friday. It was one of the things people like Jason Kennedy pointed to as a failure. So, David Coletto, I got 30 seconds left. If there's a group of Canadians out there by demographic, by age, by identification, who is it that is the most accessible right now for Pierre Poilievre if he can find a way to grow from the 41% or 40% he got in the last election? Who is that group of Canadians?
Yeah, I think it's probably middle-aged Canadians. Now I feel like I'm there, millennials, Gen X, because the boomers have left the house for now for the Conservatives. They love Mark Carney. They're not a huge fan of Pierre Poilievre. So it's I think middle-aged folks who are feeling the stretch of their budget, who yes are worried about Donald Trump, but not as obsessed about Donald Trump, I think, as those older cohorts, and they are still more likely to vote than that youngest Gen Z group, which while we see evidence among men, particularly, there's an openness to the Conservatives, you just can't guarantee they're going to show up to vote. So politically, I think those middle-aged, middle-class, suburban, think young parents, older parents right now of kids, that's I think the sweet spot right now to convince them. And I think Pierre Poilievre's message in his speech, to some extent, is trying to speak directly to them. Right. And we'll see whether he can convince them of that. Okay, so everyone I was hanging out with at the rink yesterday, that's who he's got to go for. David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data, Shachi Kurl, the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Thank you both for your time. Appreciate it.
Take care, David.